Okay, good morning or good week or good evening whenever it is you're watching this week. I think there's a few of you out there, so good morning and welcome. Um, I know this is Labor Day, but this is the day and time of the week when I can, based on my weekly schedule, when I just have to do the lecture part. So good morning, Kay. So if you're able to be here, I know it's Labor Day, but that's great if you can, and if not, as always, of course, you can watch it on the video. So um, you can just sort of think of it as you're either here to watch the recording of the lecture or you're not. But um, thanks to you if you could be here. It's always fun to have a few people, and maybe some questions will come up as we go through the content this morning. So for those of you who are having a Labor Day that where you get off of work or whatever it is that you do that you can celebrate. I hope you enjoyed that. That's cool. Um, Otherwise, we'll get going. So we are now entering into week 3. Um, so I'm not sure if everyone did manage to install CalSay, but uh, every person in the class, bar one, at least had a CalSay command in the homework. So I hope that means that almost all of you were able to actually try it. Um, the reason for CalSay is because it's cute and it's fun, but it also is just sort of getting you accustomed to the idea, the process of typing a command, pressing enter to see the results, typing a command and trying options with it, typing a command and feeding it with additional information like the message that you wanted, looking at a man page, a manual page, all those things. It's a big deal to get comfortable with that. So if you already feel like that's becoming not a big deal, then things are going great for you. And if you're still not comfortable with the text-based interface, well, that's pretty much all we do this semester, except for maybe one exception or two where we look at some graphic environments. But anyway, yeah, it will come. We do lots of command line stuff. So I'm going to walk through the module and just kind of remind you what's going on this week. So I'm at the course homepage, where I always start all the ways to get in touch with me, and then all of the content and all of the big assignments are accessible through the schedule at the bottom of the homepage. So that's where I am right now. Just going to double check and make sure that we're looking at the same thing. We are. Okay. So we're in week 3. So I know this may or may not be, I hope that all of you find this something interesting to do, but I'm going to install Debian on my system. Pardon me. So I'm going to leave Xubuntu behind, and I know for several of you, just getting Xubuntu working was challenging enough. You don't have to abandon your Xubuntu installation if you don't want, but the experience that I want to show you, and I hope that you'll choose to share in, is installing an operating system with no graphical user interface. We're literally no mouse, no graphics. It's just you and your keyboard and commands on the screen. So that's the way I'm going to work for the next many weeks. I'm going to install my Debian today, and I'm going to work only from a text-based system where there aren't even graphics anywhere to be seen. It's just going to be text on a background. So if you're one of the Mac users who had to install the UTM system, I'm not sure if there is in the UTM gallery a Debian without a graphics system on the front of it. So what I would recommend to you if you're a Mac user using the other setup is that you figure out how to log in to a command line only environment. So you can actually change from logging into your graphical desktop to just a text-based environment. So that would be my challenge to you if you're one of the Mac users, is go figure out how to do that on your UTM virtual machine. And then you can share in the same experience that I'm going to have for the next many, many weeks. And hopefully most of us will get to have, which is no graphics, no pictures, no mouse, no nothing. The point of that is, at least it was true for me, and I hope it would be true for you, that the idea that I don't need a mouse and I don't have to click on things, that I can somehow access all of the content on my system and do productive work, it's very empowering to realize that you can take away my graphics and I can still be a productive user of my computer. Okay, so let's go look through the week 3 module and then we'll get a Debian install started. So for those of you who can manage it, I highly recommend it. It's not a deal breaker if you don't get Debian installed the way that I get it installed, but you should at least have a try if you can, so that you have this experience. And if you struggle with this, then I recommend that you, and we can do this together in Canvas Inbox or Piazza, but you work to use your system that you have been logging into with a graphical environment and log into it without the graphics running. And then you can have this experience. So I'm going to start up a Debian install and then go do some other things during the live stream this morning. And then we'll go back and sort of see how our Debian install is doing. We're going to encounter several new commands this week. These commands, like you can just sort of mark this. These commands, some of them are like possibly 80 to 90% of the commands that you use as a Linux operator are here on the screen today. So ls, use it a lot. cd, use it a lot. Make dir, rm, move, copy. These are all just the basics of how do you create and manage files and directories on your system. It's a huge amount of what you do as an operator on any computer system, and particularly on a Linux system. Yeah, and then a few sort of other bonus commands that are referenced in the materials that I'm asking you to read. So we'll encounter some new commands and then sort of some textbook type of learning, which is the File System Hierarchy Standard, or FHS. I'm going to go ahead and just give you the big spoiler about the File System Hierarchy Standard. It sounds super, super fancy. What it means is that for most Linux systems, you will find the same kinds of things in the same places. That's all that it means. If I sit down at a Linux system today and I've never seen this particular distribution before, and someone says, where do you think you will find the executables, like the commands for the users to use? The File System Hierarchy Standard tells me it should be in /user/bin, and that's likely where I will find them. So that's all it means. Big spoiler, FHS simply means that on most Linux systems, you will find the same things in the same places. That's nice because as a user, that means you can sit down at any Linux and find the same things in the same places, which is what you would want to be able to do. Pardon me. Okay. So that's sort of the textbook part. So a little bit less readings this week. I have the File System Hierarchy Standard page pulled up so I can talk about it briefly here. And then we'll talk about... Good morning, Robo. Nice to see you here. Okay, so I have the FHS reading up, and then there's a couple of other readings that touch on the commands we're going to play with today. The lab assignment, so you can't see it always on the screen, but this week we have hands-on experiments. So I'm going to come back to this lab assignment and just show you what the hands-on experiments pages look like. But I create these hands-on experiments pages so that people aren't just completely lost, like, what should I do? What should I try? I have created sort of a series of commands that if you're sort of finding it difficult to come up with ideas about what to do and what to try, the hands-on experiments will tell you, try these things and see what happens. So we're going to come back to this after I get through the module. Discussion as always. So we're locked in. That's great that everyone's using the filter and finding the class discussion. So it was not in this class, but I had only one person out of my 180 students who didn't locate their discussion contribution into the class discussion. So I just have that one person to work with on reading and following instructions, which is very encouraging. 1 out of 180 is a pretty small amount. Um, and then finally, reminders. So this week is kind of a normal week. Had a lab as always. We had the discussion as always. I hope that you can find or make time to do some of these experiments. The way to feel some mastery of Linux operation is to sit at a Linux machine and type commands and get results out of them. Okay, so let me go back to the lab. All right, so I will return here in just a moment. So I'm about to install Debian, and I just want to point out to you that the guides page has a walkthrough. So I'm going to not do this super slow because it takes time, but I'm going to start my Debian installation. But there is a guide for VirtualBox that will walk you through the entire process of installing Debian. Okay, so what I did to set up for this is I went to the Debian website, and I clicked on the download link. And then what I'm looking for, wait, it already thinks that I downloaded, so I don't want that because it already knows that I downloaded it. So how do I show you what I did? Well, dumb thing. Oh, okay. Let's go to the Getting Debian because I want you to see what I saw. All right, so here's what I saw the first time. Getting Debian. So I want to download an installation image. I chose the small CD, which is a minimal installation. And then if you're on a PC, you'll be AMD 64. That's an Intel 64-bit processor. If you know what you're doing, you could try, like the UTM people could use the ARM64 and that would run nicely in UTM, but the setup's going to be different. So you might try it in UTM, but your experience is going to be different than what I'm about to show. So I downloaded the AMD 64 image, and then I'll show you here in a second how that looks. So it's going to take some wrangling for me to show you all the steps, but I'm going to do my best. So I'm going to switch over and start walking through the process, and I'm going to have to make adjustments to the screen so you can see all my steps. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new virtual machine. Yeah, and now you can't see, so I'm going to have to add as I go. So let me get it. All right, so here's the screen that I'm looking at now. And I'm just going to call it Debian 11.4.0. I'm putting the version number here just in case I decide to install a different Debian at some point. Let me blow this up for you. Okay, so I manually typed the name Debian 11.4.0. I have it going where all my other VMs are. As soon as you name it Debian, it guesses that you're probably installing a Debian system, and I am in fact installing a 64-bit Debian. I have enough RAM on this system where I can jack it up a little bit. I'm just going to go to 2048 megabytes, which should be adequate for a system that's not going to run graphics, at least not for a very long time. And then I'm going to leave it at create virtual hard disk now. And I'm going to have to keep adding sources so you can see everything that happens. Unfortunately, there's no other way to do this without showing you my whole desktop, which there's no point in doing. All right, so here's the screen I'm looking at now. And I'm not going to touch anything, although I have been discovering that this 8 gigs is cutting it pretty darn close, the default. So if you have it, I would go up to at least 10. I'm going to actually double that. In fact, I'm just going to type it as 16. Okay, 16 gigs is what I want. I typed it in. If you don't have 16 gigs, then just take the 8 and it should be okay. But I've been finding that I'm starting to cut it pretty close when I accept the default. So I'm going to go ahead and crank it up a little bit. But if you can go up to 10, that's good. If you can go up to 12, that's good. If you have to leave it at 8, that's fine. And if you have to delete other virtual machines, like the Xubuntu machine, to have the space, the image is still out there for you to download, so you can always go get it later. And we haven't actually done much work in it anyway, so you shouldn't be losing much data. Anyway, just sort of think about this step. How much space do you have? You don't need a huge amount in a modern computer, but I'm starting to find that the default of 8 gigs is not enough over time, so I'm just going to double on that. Okay, so now we are back to, so I can get rid of these things. So let me get rid of them. Okay, so now I have my new Debian 11.4 system. Thanks for your patience. Just the nature of installing this thing. So here's my new system powered off. So before I actually start it, I'm going to go into the settings for it. And I'm going to have to make this so that you can see the settings. Okay, and then I just do a quick sort of walk through all of it just to look at stuff. So I'm on the general screen. I'm going to look at advanced. So I'm not going to do this, but if you want to be able to drag and drop and copy and paste, it's rare that you would need to do this at this stage of the semester, but you might want to enable. I usually do, well, you can't see it, but I'll select it, and then I usually would pick bidirectional drag and drop here. This lets you copy and paste text back and forth into your virtual machine. It also lets you drag and drop files back and forth into your virtual machine. We don't actually need it, at least not for a very long time, but that's a setting that you can play around with. Description, if you want to, it doesn't do anything. Disk encryption, I'm not going to bother with. Okay, so the system screen. So the things that I do, and I'm starting to discover that some of you should do this as well. We don't need to boot from floppy, so I'm going to take that out. I am going to leave boot from optical, boot from hard disk. Booting from optical will let us boot the download, the installer image that we downloaded. I'm going to pointing device. I think that seems all okay. Yeah, that's all okay. Processor, I don't have much hardware on the system that I'm running right now, so I just leave it where it is. And then I just leave that where it is. Okay. Display. I might crank this up a little bit. Depends on your system. I'm going to take it up to 32 megs of video memory. I've only got the one monitor, and I'm not going to touch anything else. Remote display and recording are not issues for me. Storage. Okay, so we need to do a couple things here. We need to go to this CD one that says empty, and I'm going to, you're not going to see all of this, but anyway, what I want to select is choose a disk file. This is on the guide. Choose a disk file, and I'm going to choose the Debian that I just downloaded, which you're going to now see. So hopefully you can see it on the screen now. There's the, in my downloads, that Debian AMD 64 net installer ISO. And that's what I want connected to my CD. That way, when it boots, it will boot directly into this installer and I can start the installation. Everything else I leave alone. Audio I never touch. Network I never touch. Serial ports I never touch. USB. This would be if you wanted to connect a device like a thumb drive to your host machine and you wanted the virtual machine to be able to read like a USB thumb drive. We don't need that kind of stuff. So I'm going to disable it. And for some of you, you need to disable it because your computer complains if you don't. So probably what I would recommend is you disable the USB controller. But I would also tell you that you can always come back to these settings. You can shut down the virtual machine and come back to these settings and experiment with them. Shared folders I'm not going to do, and then user interface, I just leave it as it is. So that's the settings. The big one is in this storage section that you get the installer image connected to the CD-ROM, so it will boot that way. That's the big one. If you do nothing else that I did, this is the one that you need to do. Okay, so now the system is ready to start. So I'm going to start it, and I will then make an adjustment so you can see what's going on. So let me press start. Okay, here we go. And you can't see it yet, so I will fix that. All right, so here is the screen, which is now behind. So let's put it in front. Okay, so now we have all right, so this is what it booted into. And I'm gonna take the graphical install. And I'm going to take it through a couple of steps, and then we're going to go do other stuff while it installs. So I'm going to press enter here. And yeah, it got all crazy. I'm happy with the default, happy with the default, happy with the default. It's a fairly minimal system, so we don't have to spend that much time kind of watching this happen. The worst thing that happens when you're doing an install is that something doesn't work and the machine won't boot or it gets stuck or something. Then you just use the X on the window to close it, delete the whole system, and start over again. It's no big deal. So now it's picking up my host computer's networking setup. Okay, so you can change this. The host name is simply the computer's sort of plain language name. It's not going to really matter because it's running as a virtual machine independent of anything else, but I'll go ahead and just leave the default there. I'm not going to use a domain name because this is just a standalone virtual machine. Okay, so I am going to do passwords in here. And the important thing is you need to use a password that you know you're going to remember. I'm going to go ahead and show it in the clear so that you can see what I'm typing. And I'm simply going to use password, which is obviously a terrible password, but for a throwaway virtual machine that I'm going to use for a couple months and then throw away. That's fine. I can remember that I use password as the root user's password. So this is the superpowered administrator account, root, and root's password is password. Now I do usually add a user for myself. In fact, they're not going to let me not add a user for myself, so I'm going to add myself. You can do the same. I like the username jboyd. Really, the only trick is don't put spaces in a username. So that's going to be the name of the regular user on my system. Like Butte is the regular user on our Xubuntu. I'll show you my password's in the clear so you can see what I'm typing. I'm just going to use password for this as well, which is, of course, a terrible password, but for a throwaway virtual machine that's not going to ever do anything useful in the world, should be fine. Pacific time zone. Use entire disk. Just leave it on the default. It's already selected the disk that I created when I was doing the virtual machine setup. All files in one partition, yes. And then finish partitioning and write changes to disk, yes. This one is going to make me say yes to it. So this is just a little gut check kind of question. Like, are you sure you want to do this? But what it's overriding is a virtual machine hard disk. So it's not going to do anything to your computer other than create a file that the virtual machine will use as its hard drive. So yes to that. Okay, now it's installing, so let's go do some other stuff, and then we will check back in on it in a moment. Okay, so we have our Debian going. So I'm going to switch for the time being to the concept of the file system hierarchy standard. So there's going to be like fancy sounding stuff in here. It's a reference for describing the conventions used for the layout of a Unix system. But all that really means is that the folder structure, like the names and locations of the folders, if a Linux system is aligning itself to the file system hierarchy standard, then it will have the same names and locations of its folders, its directories, and also the same names and locations of things like the home directories of its users and where the utilities, where the commands are stored on the system and that kind of stuff. So all this tells you is that if I pick up a Linux system and it tells me that it is compliant with the file system hierarchy standard, then what it's telling me is I can expect to find certain folders with certain contents in it. So the big ones, and there's some questions to ask you to explore this, but I'll just point out the big ones. This slash here, I'm even going to zoom it in. The slash, make sure you can see. That is the root folder. So this is the same as it would work on a Mac. There's only one folder, basically, one tree with all of the directories and files in the one tree on Linux and Mac systems. And both of them actually use this slash, which we call the root directory, not to be confused with the root user. The root directory is the beginning of the entire file and directory structure. So you can kind of think of this as a tree where the root directory is at the top, and then all of the branches with the different files and folders and subfolders come down off of that root. This is different from Windows, because the way Windows does it is we usually have our main drive, which is labeled the C drive, which is its own tree of files and folders. But then if we were to attach a USB drive, we would get something like a D drive, which is a brand new and separate tree of files and folders coming off of it. On Mac and Linux systems, if I connect a USB drive, the USB drive's contents are actually connected as a branch of the main root tree. This is very good if you are a user or a programmer, because on a Windows system, you never know for sure what drive letter a tree is going to be assigned. So it's very difficult to program those things. Whereas in a Linux or a Mac system, everything is always either part of the tree or attached to it when a new device is attached. So that's a big one, the root folder, which means slash, and that's where everything in the Unix system starts from. So to locate anything on a Unix system, you start at that root folder and then work your way down. So that slash, we call it the root directory. Okay, and then we have some other ones, and I'll just kind of scroll down. You'll read through these a little bit and talk about some of the ones that are interesting for us. Short term, so slash home. So you'll notice that the home folder is a branch of the root of the main tree. So it's one of the main branches coming off of the root directory is home. And inside of this home folder is where you will find all of your user folders, your users' home directories, which is the same. Windows has the concept of home directories and Mac has the concept of home directories. It's the same thing. This just sort of tells you in the file system hierarchy standard, where would we find these users' home? It would be in slash home. The slash referring to the root folder, home referring to a branch off the root folder. We also have for us, let's see what else is interesting. So this user branch is interesting to us because in it is the user bin branch, which is really a subdirectory of the user folder, which is a branch of the root directory. But user bin is how we'd all say this, or slash user slash bin. This is where most of the sort of normal commands or utilities live. We'll go look around in it a little bit today so that you can see that this is true. So a lot of the commands that we end up typing and pressing enter on, they are stored in user bin, and that is a file system hierarchy standard idea, is that you take all of the sort of common utilities and you store them in this bin folder, which is a subfolder of the user folder, which is a branch from the root of the file system. All right, and then there's a bunch of others, and we'll see several of these come up over the course of the semester. I know I'm scrolling around quickly, but you'll scroll around and read through these things. So what is this all telling me? A Linux system that complies with the file system hierarchy standard. So the creators of Debian have chosen to comply with this standard, meaning you will find these folders with these names with the same contents as are described on this Wikipedia page, which makes it very easy for a Linux user to navigate a file system hierarchy standard based system, because we know where to find things. That's what that really means. Okay, let's check in on our install. So that's the file system hierarchy standard. Let's switch over and check in on our install. Okay. Scanning your installation. Do I want to scan more media? I do not. I have no more media. That is all I have. US. This, you can select any of these. I'm going to leave it on the default. We're not pulling that much anyway, but you could switch these to other things if you wanted and you'd get the same result. I don't have a proxy to work through, so, and most of you, very few of you will, unless you're doing something from work and then you know what to do there. There's APT, by the way, which we used in the live stream last week to install Cowsay. So this installer is using APT to get a listing of the available software and then help us to install it on our new system. And I'm just giving it in a second to see if it wants to ask me a question, and I will answer. Okay, it's going to be working for a bit. So what time is it? 8:34. I should have booted up another Linux so that we could run some commands. Yeah, so let's, I'll boot up another Linux and run some commands while we wait for this thing to install. So let me boot up, and then I'll show it to you after it boots. I'm going to boot up the Xubuntu, and hopefully I'm not stretching my computer past its abilities here. So anyway, it is on its way. And then I'll switch out so that you can see. Oh, well, let's answer the question while we're at it. Yeah, I'm going to leave that as no. Okay, so now oh, wait. Okay, it went faster than I thought. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to turn off everything except for standard system utilities. So I'm going to turn off everything because I purposely want to have no graphics. And most of these things are graphics. So the desktop environment, that's graphics. Yeah, I don't want that. I want standard system utilities. So I don't want a desktop environment. I don't want GNOME or XFace, GNOME Flashback, KDE, Cinnamon, Mate, LXDE, and LXQT, or a web server or SSH. I want none of those things. I want the standard system utilities. And that probably means that this install finishes quick and I may not even need the other virtual machine to do commands. And remember, the worst thing that happens is you make a choice you didn't want. You could redo it, or you can figure out how to change your setup. So you can always go into a Linux system and change the software that you have and change the configuration of the software. But for some of you at this stage, it might be quickest if you make a mistake and you realize, oh, I didn't want it that way, to just delete the virtual machine and start over. Hopefully you're seeing in this experience of me doing it that it doesn't actually take very long. And you can probably kind of multitask it a little bit and do other things on the side. Am I going to lose my patience, or am I going to let it finish? I mean, it looks like it wants to finish, so I might just be patient for a minute or two. So the thing about grub, I'm going to leave it as yes. So enter device manually or the only available device. So I'm just going to switch it and select the only available device in this virtual machine. This /dev, by the way, that is a file system hierarchy standard thing. So there's the root / dev is where devices are connected. They're also connected in other ways, but anyway, /dev would be where hardware devices are connected, and then SDA is the name of the hard drive, which is connected to the root file system. And maybe this is just quick, and we'll finish. This seems like it's going pretty quick, so I might just wait it out. I have the other virtual machine up and ready to go. If this seems to slow down on a step. One thing you can watch while these are working, I don't know if you can see it, but at the bottom there's a little hard drive icon, and you can see activity on it because there's little blinking lights. Installation is complete. Boot into my system. Okay. So you may or may not. Yeah, you can see. All right, so far so good. Still so far so good. All right, here we are. We have one. I'm pleased. So here is my graphics only Debian system. Let me get rid of the other virtual machine, which is just chewing up resources on my computer. All right, so here we go. We're not going to get the same kind of help that we were getting, but now we can do all of the rest of the stuff in my new Debian system. So I created a user for myself named jboydT. So I'm going to type in that user and press enter. It wants my password, which I said was password. So be careful here, Password, because there's going to be no indication that you're logging in, that you're typing characters. You have to just keep track of the characters that you type. So be purposeful about it. So notice how I went Password. And then not even any characters are showing on the screen. So I'll give you the common way to describe this situation is that the system is not echoing my password. And when I say the system is not echoing my password, I mean that the system is giving no indication, visual indication that I'm typing anything. The password doesn't show up. The asterisk symbol doesn't show up to represent the characters. Nothing about my password is echoed to the screen. So Password, and now I'm going to press, oh, it timed out. I have to start over. All right, so JBoyT, that's my login. Password, Password, and press enter. And I'm in. We have no graphics in here. Everything has to be done by commands. So you might remember the clear command, which clears the screen. Still works. That's good. So I'm just going to go quickly through the ones that you can see on the screen. And I think I'm okay on time. I am okay on time, yeah. So let's just try some of the commands. So I should have put these in maybe a different order, but we'll start with PWD, which stands for Present Working Directory. But what that tells me is what directory on the file system am I currently located in? Am I currently viewing? So I am viewing /home/JBoyT. You might remember from just a few minutes ago that /home is where user home directories are placed if a Linux system is complying with the file system hierarchy standard. So that my user's home directory, JBoyT, is in the /home directory that is file system hierarchy standard compliant. So far so good. On a system that uses the file system hierarchy standard, this is what we would expect, and that is what we got. Okay, so let's try some of the other ones. So ls is the listing command. It's how we list the contents of our present working directory. So what are the contents of JBoyT's home directory? Nothing, as it turns out. Although that's not entirely true, which we're going to look at in just a second. But nothing. At least nothing obvious. Okay, so we'll go back a step, and what I should do is bring up the man page for every command that we're going to try, assuming there is one, and see what the man page has to say. So let's bring up the man page for present working directory and see what it says. So the important bits are at the top. So PWD under name, PWD, print name of current or working directory. So I refer to this command as present working directory, but its job is to print your current directory. Where am I located in the file system? What folder am I looking at when I do a listing? You can see there are some options here under description. So these are options. We can try one or two of them just to see what happens. I'm going to try --help. Display this help and exit. So let's try it. I'm going to clear first and do pwd --help. When you input options, be careful to put spaces between the command and the option. So that's pwd space --help. But notice there's no spaces in the --help because the man page didn't say to put spaces in there. So there's a briefer presentation of the pwd help page, which is not the same as a manual page. You'll notice it's shorter, it's briefer, it doesn't have all the same information in it, but it does at least give me the basics of the command. All right, so let's do man page for ls. list directory contents. So that's all it does, is it lists directory contents. I'm going to show you an option or two here. And you'll notice there's a lot. So I can't really do it with my pointer, but if you go down in the description section, you'll see the option -A, comma, space, -- all. So that means that you can express that option in either way. You can say -A or -- all. And then it says do not ignore entries with dot. So let's just quit the man page and go see what that's all about real quick. So Q to quit. I'm going to clear just so you have less to have to deal with on the screen. So I'm going to do ls-a and see if anything is different. Okay, there are some things now. In blue, there's a dot, and in blue there is a ... and then there is a .bash logout, a .bash rc, and a .profile. So those files, bash logout, bash rc, and profile, we call dot files for obvious reasons. They're files that have a name that starts with dot. So if I type ls with -- all, I should get the exact same result because the man page told me that either of those ways of doing that option would work, and it does. So let's try it without that option, just ls, and see what we get. Okay, so notice the difference. I don't know if anyone's out there in chat willing to sort of venture an answer here, but what's the difference here? In terms of dot files, what's the difference between ls and ls with the -A option? Nice. So K got exactly the way I would say it. ls by itself does not list dot files. So a lot of computer systems do this. Dot files are files that contain useful information, but we don't use them frequently. So by putting a dot in front of their name, all we really do is kind of keep them out of sight until we actually want or need to see them. So it's just a little trick to have less information to look at on the screen. So you tend to put your customizations in dot files. And then you tend to put your regular work in files that don't have a dot at the beginning. And we'll do a little experiment and make our own dot file just to see. Okay, so ls does not show dot files. ls with -A or -- all does show dot files. The blue ones, the dot and the dot are shortcut. Those are shortcuts. So the blue dot by itself represents the present working directory. So when you do a -A listing, you get the dot files show up. And the dot files include two shortcuts: dot, which is really just representing the present working directory, and ... which is the directory that is one up in the tree from the present working directory. And we'll do some experiments to sort of get a feel for that as well. Okay, so while we're on this idea, let's use the touch command and run a little dot file experiment. So before I do that, I'm going to bring up the manual page for the touch command. Now it sounds fancy. It says change file timestamps, but we're not going to use it for that. But what's important to us under the description is the second sentence. So a file argument, and notice it's capital F, capital I, capital L, capital E, a file argument. And if you look just a couple of lines up on the screen, you'll see touch option file. So, and it's the file, the blue one is all caps as well. So in the description, that file in all capital letters is referring to that file in all capital letters, slightly higher on the screen in blue. So a file argument that does not exist is created empty. So that means if we use the touch command and put a file name in there, the touch command will actually create that file if it doesn't already exist. And then you'll also notice the option, which is in square brackets. So in the synopsis. So when you see the option in square brackets, that means that you don't have to provide options if you don't want to. So the options are optional, even though there's a lot of them. -A, -C, -D, -F, which is ignored. So anyway, let's just use a basic touch command. Q to quit clear so you have less stuff to look at on the screen. So if I use the touch command and let's just say first file.txt. So before I go on from here, your life will be a lot easier if you don't put spaces in the names of things. So when I'm working in Linux and I would like to have a space because I think it would read easier that way, I use an underscore instead. So instead of first space file here, I have first underscore file. That's because you will discover if you don't do this that your life is much more difficult than if you had done it the way I do it. So don't put spaces in the names of folders or in the names of files in a Linux system, and you will have a much easier life for it. The .txt doesn't have to be there, but I find it useful to put .txt, which is a signal to me when I'm working on my system that this is just plain text. It's not a word processing file. It's not a video file. It's not a music file. It's not a web page. It's just characters in a file, plain text. Okay, so I did a touch, first file.txt, and nothing happened. For some commands, like touch, if nothing happens, that's a good thing. That means that it ran to its completion without any errors. The way to see what happened here is to use the ls command. So I'm going to do ls command. I will not be showing the dot files, but I will show any files in here that don't begin with a dot in their name. And there's my first file. Now let's do a ls-a. So you'll see that all the dot files are now showing up and also first file.txt. So when you run the listing command with -a, you get all of the files you would normally see, plus the dot files, the files that you want to less commonly see because they aren't files that you use frequently. Now let's make ourselves a dot file. So touch dot, I'll call it secrets. And I'm not going to use a .txt here, but I could if I wanted. Linux, as it turns out, doesn't care about file extensions. It cares about the contents of files. So I will touch .secrets. So if I do a regular listing with no -a, I only see first file, and I don't see the files in here that start with dots in their names. So now if I do an all listing, I see the dot files, including the .secrets file that I just created. So you can create dot files for yourself. All it means is that a regular listing won't show them. It means that if you want to see the dot files, you have to use a -a option to see all of the files, the non-dot files and the dot files. That concept of a dot file will be new to all of you probably. You'll get used to it. Dot files are simply there to allow us to store information that we don't need to work with very often. So we don't want our screen cluttered up with dot files most of the time. We just want to see our regular work. But occasionally we want to work with the dot file because we want to change one of our customizations or store some other piece of information that we don't feel like we need to access frequently, but we want it there anyway. Hopefully that makes some kind of sense. Okay. Yeah, so let's add some listing options, and then we'll do some make directory stuff. So let me go back to the man page for ls, and I'm going to use the arrow keys to scroll it. And you can try any of these that you would like. You can try -A, which says almost all. Do not list the implied dot and dot dot, so that might be an interesting one to try. List entries by columns, which it kind of already does, but you could try that. So you see there's a lot of options in here. Pardon. We're going to try the -F, which can also be run with -- classify, but that is a huge pain to type. So I'm going to try -F, which says append indicator to entries. So Q to quit. Clear, so we have less stuff to look at on the screen. And then I'm going to type ls-F. There's a space in there, ls space -F. So that didn't seem to change anything. Let's combine it with the all listing. So we're going to say all, including the dot files, and the decorator, whatever that means, and see if we can interpret that. Okay, so this is showing decorators, which is really just for us. If you'll notice, the blue dot and the blue dot dot have slashes at the end of them now. What that tells us is that the dot represents a folder or directory, and the dot dot also represents a folder or directory. Whereas .bash logout, .bash rc, first file, .profile, .secrets are all just files. So the -F option will append a slash on directory names. The single dot is the present working directory, which is /home/jboyd_t. The dot dot is the directory that's one above, which is /home, and those are both directories, not just files, so they have the slash at the end of them. So ls did that for me with that extra option. Okay. So now let's make ourselves a directory. So I'm going to make a directory with the make dir command. Let's look at the man page real quick. So make dir, make directories. This is the same command in the Windows console, and you can also do this on the Mac terminal. So if I go to the synopsis, make dir, option is optional, and then directory. So I can use this to make a new directory, and we will see other uses of it down the road. But for now, if I say make dir space and the name of a directory, it will make that directory for me. So Q to quit. Clear, so we have less to look at on the screen. And let's note what present working directory is before we start making new ones. And I'm going to make a directory, and I will call it week 3. It might even be easier to read if I put an underscore in there. I think that's easier to read, actually. No space, not week space 3, week _3, where I would have wanted a space. Okay, so now let's look at the results of our work. If we do a listing, you notice that week 3 is blue, which is another indicator that it is a directory. We can do ls-F, which will append a slash on the back end of directory names. We can do an ls-AF, which will be all the dot files and my regular stuff. So those are all the different views, right? So now let's add a command. First, we'll look at a man page. So make dir is to make directories. And I can make more directories if I want to. I can make a directory for next week if I wanted to. Make dir week 4. So now I have week 3 and week 4 directories, and I could use those to organize my files. But let's add a new command now. So let's, I'll bring up the man page for it. First, this is in part to remind you that you ought to be doing this. When you encounter a new command, just pop open the man page for it and have a quick read to see what it's about. Okay, so this one is has no manual entry, and that will happen. Sometimes you can get help for a command with no manual page with -- help. That one does have a help page, so that can be useful. Change the shell working directory. And then there's a whole bunch of text. I'm going to actually walk you through some of the common usages of it. So CD had no man page, but it did have a help page. That's also not always true for every command you might try, but that's sort of your next line of inquiry. So if the man page, you don't get one, which I don't, then try for a help page and see if you get one, which in the case of CD we did, which is nice. Okay, but its basic job is to let us change directories. So I'm going to do a listing. I'll notice, and I'll also remind you the present working directory. Darn it. Wait, water maybe. So let's change directories into week 3. You'll notice my prompt, which is the thing on my screen that's always there. Every time I enter a command, it comes back. My prompt says jboyt@debian:\squiggle/week3. So my prompt is showing me that I'm in a different location. I can also do pwd and show that I'm actually now in the week 3 folder. If I do a listing, there's nothing here. If I do an all listing, I will see that it has the familiar dot and dot dot. Dot represents the present working directory, and dot dot represents one up from here. So you can actually use those to change directories to. So I can change directories to dot, which, well, let me do a pwd and then do that. So pwd, I'm in the week 3 folder. If I change directories to what dot represents, I don't actually go anywhere because dot represents the present working directory. There is a use for the dot that we will see later in the semester, but you will see it come up in the all list, the ls-a's, and you just kind of will learn that it represents the present working directory, and we do have a use for it later in the semester. But there's the other one, which is dot dot, which I'm told represents one above. So let's try it. If we cd space dot dot, where did we end up? Back in /home/jboyt. So we actually went one back up the directory tree for doing the cd space dot dot. And then we can go into the week 4 folder. Do a little bit of practicing. We can do cd space dot dot to go back up 1, which is my home folder, and kind of get a handle on how CD works. How am I doing on time? I may go over 10 minutes or so. Sorry about that if you had somewhere to be, but the video will be available. Okay, so let's see. I'm not going to do all of them. I'm just going to do the critical ones, and I will let you explore the couple of ones that remain after that. Let me add one to this, by the way. Which I don't think there's a question about, but we should have remove directory as well. So I'm going to do a listing here. So we can remove directories. So I don't need week 4 yet, so I'm going to remove it. The catch to remove directory is that the directory has to be empty for it to work. So since week 4, I never did anything in it, I can just remove it. But let's go into week 3. So I'm going to change directories, go down into week 3. And I'm going to touch a file here. So then I'll just call it like homework3.txt. Do a listing to prove that it's there. And then I'm going to go cd space dot dot. I'm going to go back up 1, which will be my home folder. And now I'm going to try to remove the week 3 folder. And remove directory will tell me you can't because week 3 is not empty of contents. Now there are other ways to do what I'm going to do, but I want to show you kind of the the manual way so that you get the practice. So, okay, well, let's go back down into the week 3 folder. If we do a listing, we'll see that homework3.txt is here. So let's use the rm command to remove that file. So rm removes files, rmdir removes folders. And if you read the man page, you'll see that there's kind of an asterisk next to rm. But for now, we're going to learn to use rm to remove files, rmdir to remove folders. And by remove, I mean delete. There's no trash system in this environment. So if you remove something, it's gone forever. There's no getting it back. So be careful with it. I think the trash system is a good innovation because it gives you a chance to restore things that you didn't mean to delete. But when we're working from the Linux command line, if you remove something, it's gone forever. This is true in Mac, by the way, as well. If you are in the terminal and you run an rm or an rmdir, you're not getting it back. So be very, very careful with the remove and remove dir commands. All right, so remove homework. I will do a listing in my week 3 folder and notice there's nothing here. So I will do cd space ... which I know changes directories to go up one, which is now my home directory. And now I will try again. I'll do a listing to remind you what's here. I will try again to remove the week 3 directory, which now is gone because I had emptied it out and I'm back to my original first file.txt. Let me do a clear, all listing. Now I'm also going to remove my .secrets file because I don't need it. So I'm going to do rm.secrets. Just to show you there's no trick about the dot files. They just, because you put a dot as the first character in their name, you're telling the ls command whether or not to show them normally. So there, it's gone. Okay, so let's do a couple more. So let's make a, let's use touch to create a couple more files. So I will say second file, third file, and now I have a first file.txt. The .txt part is there for me so that I am reminded that it's just meant to be plain text and nothing funny in it. Second file.txt, third file.txt. I used underscores because we don't want to use spaces because if we do, we will just make our lives difficult. Now I'm going to make a directory again. So I'm going to put week 3 directory back. And I can do the -F, capital F option if I want to see the slash, the decorator at the end of the folder names. So there's all the stuff that I'm working with right now. So last 2 commands that I will go into in detail are the move and the copy command. So we're going to do them both and then we'll go look at the results real quick. So if I use the move command and I say move, so the way you use the move command is you say move first file.txt. And you can use it in 2 ways, even though technically they're the same thing, but it's easy. It's helpful to think of using move in 2 ways. So one way to use move is to rename files. So let's say I don't like that I spelled out first file.txt. I would rather have said file1.txt. So this is a renaming use of the move command. So mv space. So I take the old name, which was first file.txt, space, the new name that I want, file1.txt. So I can use move to move a file to a new name, which is another way of saying renaming it. And if I do a listing, now I have file1, which I renamed with the move command, second file and third file. And I'm going to do the same to the other 2. So move second file.txt, and I'll call that file2.txt instead. And then do a listing to remind myself to confirm that it worked. And then I will use move to rename third file.txt to be file3.txt, and then a listing. So that's one way you can use the move command, is to rename effectively a file. Another way you can use it, even though technically they're the same, but you can use the move command to move a file to a different folder. So let's move file3.txt to the week 3 folder. Now, I think it's highly advisable that when you are moving a file to a new folder, that you put a slash at the end of the folder name. And I'll show you an example really quick of why that's advisable. So, going to do that. So what this is telling the system, though, is take that file3.txt and relocate it into the week 3 folder. Now, if I do a listing, I'll notice that file 3 is gone. So let's go into week 3 and do a listing, and we'll see that file 3 is now there. Now I can also use move to take file3.txt and move it to the folder that's one up from here, which is my home. Now I'm using a lot of the ... stuff because I want you to get familiar with it and comfortable with it. So I'm saying move the file3.txt that's here up one in the hierarchy. If we do a listing, it's gone. I'm going to clear before I move up one. So I'm still in week 3. I'm going to go up one, which takes me to my home. And if I do a listing, there's file 3 back. Okay, so why did I use the slash? So let's say I did this. Move file3.txt to week 4. But there's no week 4 folder. So what happens if I move file3.txt to week 4, but there's no week 4 folder? It turns out that what I've done is I have accidentally renamed file3.txt to be week 4, even though I meant for that to be a folder name. I can tell this in a couple of ways. One is that week 4 is white on the screen, or if I show the decorators, it will show me that week 4 is in fact just a text file. So that's something to be careful of, is that you don't want to accidentally attempt to move something to a folder that doesn't exist and discover that instead of moving it to a folder that doesn't exist, you actually renamed it to be what you intended to be a folder name. So let's rename it back. So oops. So what is now week 4, I actually wanted it to stay as file3.txt. That's what I wanted. Now, if I do this, so I want to move it to a folder, but the folder is not there, I get an error, and that is preferable actually to accidentally renaming something to what you hoped would be a folder name. So if you put that slash on there when you use the move command, you can prevent making mistakes, because the shell will tell you that you made an error instead, and that's a good thing. Okay, so there's the move command. The last one, as I'm going a little bit longer than I intended. Let's do the copy command. I'm going to leave shred and file for you to look up on man pages and your reading, and hopefully you will make time to experiment with. We won't use shred or file a lot in this class, but those are commands you'll encounter in the reading, and then you can also use your system to look up man pages on them, and you can also use your system to experiment with them. Okay, but the critical last one is the copy command, or CP. So let me do a listing again. So copy does what you would think it would do, which is to make a copy of a thing. So the way you do that is you say, well, I want file2.txt. I want to make a copy, and I will call the copy file2 copy.txt. And now I have file2 copy, which is a copy of file2, not surprisingly. You can also use copy to make a copy of a file into another folder. So I can say copy file1.txt into the week 3 folder. And if I do that, and then I go into the week 3 folder, I will see that there is now a copy of file1.txt. Now, how do I know it's a copy? Because if I do a listing here and I go back up one and do a listing there, I will see that there's 2 file1.txt's now. One is a copy. So they're copies at that moment when I made the copy. There are, of course, man pages for all of this stuff, but those are fairly intuitive, but they do invite you to practice them. So practice touching files to create files, practice using makedir to make directories and remove rmdir to remove them, practice removing files, removing files, practice using the mv command to rename files and to move them into different folders, and then finally practice using the copy command to make copies of files into the same folder or into other folders. Those are all like a high percentage of the commands that you will use most of the semester on the command line we just looked at. And then I will leave shred and file for your individual exploration. They're not complicated commands. You'll find man pages for them and so on, and then you can experiment with them. So shred is interesting. We're not going to use it very much, but for you security people, you might find this one particularly interesting. I don't personally use it very much as a programmer type, but I think a system administrator type might find this command very interesting. And then the file command should also have a man page, and you can use that to sort of get at an answer. The readings for this week also talk about those things. Okay, I could go on for this for a while because it's fun to do these experiments. It's fun to feel a sense of mastery over these commands. That's a lot of commands. That puts you ahead of like 99% of the computer users in the world if you know just these commands this week. That is no joke. That you can sit down on a Windows machine, a Mac machine, or a Linux machine with these exact commands or something that's very close to them in the Windows environment and be productive. It's a very good feeling. And it also gives you the ability to be productive on any kind of computing system that someone might sit you down at. So that's it. I hope that if you do get something that amounts to a Labor Day holiday, that you enjoy that. Thanks for being here if you could be here. And I will see you on Monday morning next week. So take care and have a great week.